Hi everyone and welcome back to my booktube channel Lisa in Bookland. Today I'm here to bring you my August reading wrap up for 2023. So in August I read 10 books, actually an unusual amount of contemporary fiction for me, and I read 2 children's books. One kind of classic was one of the children's books, and kind of a few books that I bought in London as well, which I couldn't wait to read as well. So I said I'd talk about them today. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually a new enough release, and as soon as I saw it I was interested and read the blurb, and that's The Weather Woman by Sally Gardner. And this book is about Nessa Friesland. I had to check that, I'm absolutely awful at names, and she is born with this really unusual gift that she can predict the weather ever since she was a little girl, and she can predict the weather like far in advance. It's not just like knowing what the weather is going to be like tomorrow, and it's set during the Regency period, which of course was something that I was very interested in. The back cover says that she does it, like, obviously that's very controversial to be able to predict the weather, and it's complicated by the fact that she's a woman or a girl at the start of the book. So she starts predicting the weather from inside this automaton, this clockwork kind of machine. Now when I first read that, I thought she would be walking around in like a clockwork suit. I don't know if anybody else was naive enough to think it was that. Like, obviously it's not that. I don't want to, it's more kind of like a theatre show. So yeah, I really like this book. I don't think it's a new favourite, and I will say I think it's probably because the second half of the book, like, I still liked it. I guess maybe I was hoping it should have gone in a different direction than it did, and it didn't. And the direction it went in was fine. I suppose you always just kind of have in your head what you maybe would like from those characters, and it ended up more kind of traditionally maybe than I would have liked. But still very enjoyable. I absolutely loved the setting. At the start it's kind of set in this frost fair in the Thames, and it kind of it nearly ends that kind of way as well, so it's very much bookended. And I think the cover is actually perfect for this book. I suppose I just had really high expectations for this going in, so I was set up to be a little bit disappointed, but still really enjoyed it. The next book I'm going to talk about is also a book I had very high expectations for, and they weren't disappointed at all. As I remember saying to somebody when I was over there, I liked it so much. I was about a third of the way through it when I went to London, and I brought it to London. Even though it's such a massive book, I brought it over to read, and that's Babel by RF Kuang. So I was absolutely intrigued by this book when I heard about it. So again, it's set during the early 19th century but in Oxford, and it's kind of an alternative universe. Now I know RF Kuang, actually, I don't read any fantasy at all really, but like the one fantasy book that I've heard of and have kept meaning, like, that sounds really interesting, is RF Kuang's other book, The Poppy War, which has been quite popular on booktube. So she obviously just writes premises that intrigue me. But the whole background of this is this institute in Oxford called the Royal Institute of Translation, but it's not like, it is kind of like translating languages, but there's more of a like magical realism twist to it, or maybe just magical, I don't know. Sometimes I'm a bit unclear on the distinction between those two. So it's called Silverworking, and it's kind of based around the idea that when words from one language are translated into another, that you can't have like a direct translation, and that there'd be some kind of power in what's left behind, or it's just really cool. If you're like, I wouldn't say I'm a massive linguistics nerd. I do quite like the history of language and things, the little I know about it, but really enjoyed this book. If you do love words or love languages, it's one for you. I like it. Well, I suppose that's like the setting, but the real plot revolves around this guy, I've forgotten his name again, Robin Swift. How could I forget a name like that? He is actually brought by this man from Canton, from a very impoverished background, to study at this Institute of Translation, because he speaks Chinese. Which is a language that is being very sought after for this Institute of Translation. Like, there's so much world building in this. I think you could definitely write, I do hope she writes more books in this universe, because there's so much thought put into it, and it's very much like, the only other book I can compare it to really is, it's like Jonathan Swift and Mr. Norrell. It's been years since I've read that book, but it's the same kind of idea idea that there's all these footnotes in it that have historical notes about like the universe of the story, and it was just absolutely fascinating. Just so much detail, not just Chinese but every language that's discussed here in so many, and there's even a student at the institute that speaks Irish, even though this author calls it Gaelic, but I'll try not to hold it against her. But yeah, just it's so much detail. Obviously the most focus is on Chinese, so I think if you did speak Chinese this would be a really interesting read for you as well. But yeah, like the most thing what I'd heard about this book, apart from like the general idea, was that it was very heavy on like criticism of colonialism, and I completely agree. It is actually such a strange experience. So like there's the whole setting set in Oxford in this alternative universe, the silver working, they're doing really cool things, and like Robin has this like friend group. There's like 4 people in his year, and they all have slightly different backgrounds. Like without giving away spoilers, like 2 of the friends in his group have quite similar backgrounds to him, but there's one person who actually is from a very different background, and it's just a contrast there. So if for somebody that does like books set in like schools and universities like I do, you'd be so enjoying all that detail, and then like the bigger world would intrude and you'd actually be kind of annoyed. Well, I was anyways. You'd be annoyed, you're like, oh, can we not go back to the dark academic stuff and not let all this serious annoying stuff intrude? And they're like, oh my god, that's the whole point of the book. Like these people just want to be locked in Oxford and have all their institutions and academic rigour, but like it's the whole point that they're kind of ignoring or facilitating the wider world. And I don't know if that was, maybe that was just me, but that kind of guilt did come on you in on time. So yeah, I thought it was a fabulous book, and I'd really recommend it if you're thinking about reading it. It is long, but yeah, no, it's brilliant. I was a tiny bit disappointed in the end, but just like that, you'd want things to go a different way and they didn't. But yeah, brilliant, and I'm just glad to have this beautiful copy, and I really do hope that that RF Kuang does write more books set in this universe. On the front it says an arcane history, but the like title page says then the necessity of violence, and that is a really good subtitle for the book, and that's kind of a big discussion within it as well. And yeah, it's just absolutely fabulous. I think it'll be one of my favourite books this year. Look, that's the Silver Workers Tower, so maybe unintentionally quite funny or appropriate, however you wish to think about it, is English Passengers by Matthew Kneale. This is a book I'd had on my shelves for 2 or 3 years, so I was really happy to read it, and this is such an enjoyable book, really funny, but like also obviously dealt with some serious things as well. It starts off with this ship, a smuggling ship from the Isle of Man that has been transporting cargo like to other countries without paying taxes. The captain of that ship anyways ends up getting kind of found out, and he's the whole book on the run from customs really, and he just has meetings with customs officials at every port. It's so funny. But what really causes him bother is to escape and get some handy money. He decides to take on these passengers, these English passengers, started this expedition for various reasons to try and find the Garden of Eden. This reverend kind of has this idea that in Tasmania there's these 4 rivers that correspond to a biblical passage in the Bible, and that must be where the Garden of Eden is, and he wants to go there. So this ship decides to take him. He has some other people on board, this doctor who I must say there was some really unpleasant reading in this book. He is very racist and has lots of theories about the intelligence and capabilities of different races and why white people are the most superior race and all that. There's also kind of parallel storyline about like the natives in Tasmania and the impact that like colonization has had on them, which is so it's a strange kind of book where there's very serious things going on, but then there's a lot of comedy to it as well. Also discusses like prison colonies in Tasmania. So yeah, there's a lot in this book. My favourite part definitely was the comedic elements. I thought they were brilliant. Like the captain is just so unfortunate, the poor creature. So yeah, it was a good book. I enjoyed it, and yeah, I could see myself revisiting it as well, because timeline in Tasmania kind of moved very slowly throughout the whole book, and you were following these characters I suppose that you didn't know slow, and it took a while to kind of get a grasp of how the story was structured. So I think on a reread I kind of have more patience with that and enjoy it more from the start, whereas like I only started to enjoy that storyline, I suppose, after 3 or 4 chapters of it, once I kind of got my head around it. So yeah, great book, and I definitely return to it, as I said. So the next book I'm going to talk about, and the only classic today really, I've really fallen behind on my classics reading the last month or two. I did start The Small House at Allington. I was really enjoying it, but I just got interrupted then, I suppose. I haven't gone back to it, so I will be finishing that this month, and Victober is coming up anyways, so I'll catch up then. But anyways, it's a more modern classic. It was published in 1940, and that's Lassie Come Home by Eric Knight. It's a bit of a sad reason for reading this, unfortunately, and we had a Lassie dog ourselves called Frodo. Predictably I picked the name, but unfortunately he died quite suddenly there last weekend. So I was I never read Lassie Come Home, and the reason we had that breed of dog is because my mum loved the film Lassie when she was a girl, and she always wanted a Lassie collie. They're properly called a rough collie, but yeah, we call them a Lassie collie because of the film. Obviously I was quite sad about it. I was somewhat familiar with the story, and I'd always kind of wanted to read the book anyways. I contemplated reading Marley and Me instead, but I thought that might be too sad. But yeah, Lassie Come Home was such a heartwarming book really, and I think it was a lovely way to remember Frodo, who was really such a loyal dog. Like as I've mentioned many times, we live on a farm, and he'd always come walking around the farm with you, and like even if he was tired, even if it was wet, maybe in the later years not quite so much when he was getting a bit older, he might only go up once a day, whereas one time he might be there all hours of the day and night. But yes, anybody that's not familiar with the film, the first surprise is that Lassie in the book was actually a tricoloured Lassie, like the ones with black on them. So that was interesting, because the film dog is so iconic now. But yes, it's quite a simple story really. It's about this boy called Joe, I think. Joe and Lassie, his rough collie, comes to the school gate for him every day at the same time and waits for him to walk home, and goes home with him. And basically it's set in Yorkshire. The family get into financial difficulties, and Lassie unfortunately has to be sold to this wealthier man. She ends up being brought up to the Highlands of Scotland, and she still feels that call in her head that she wants to go and meet Joe after school, so she ends up escaping and walking down through the Scottish Highlands and Lowlands and into Yorkshire. So yes, it was a really nice book, because the last few dog books I've read, like classic dog books, all are really gory, and like there is still some goriness in Lassie, because I suppose in the early 20th century children were less sensitive than they are now. But yes, they needless to say, Lassie didn't kill any other dogs like has happened in previous books I've read. So I really enjoyed that one. I actually think it might be a series, which I didn't know. So yeah, it was just such a heartwarming read really, and I think it'll remind me of Frodo. So from one kind of farm book to another definite farm book, and that is The Proof of Love by Catherine Hall. I bought this in Gaze the Word in London, and I talked about it a bit in my book haul, but I've since finished it and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fabulous. So it's set in 1970s, the Lake District, and this hot day, this mathematician called Spencer Little cycles over this mountain looking for work in the Lake District, and he comes upon this farm there, and he says that he'll work for free. The farmer whose house he calls at is a bit like surprised, because but he accepts him anyways, without any need for like experience or anything like that, because he doesn't want any money, and money is tight as everywhere. And yeah, it's just about how he settles into the farm and into the community and into his new duties, I suppose. A big part of the book is this girl called Alice, who's 10 years old, and I suppose she's a bit lonely because she doesn't have any friends around, and he's running away from Cambridge from something. There's a reason that he's looking for something completely different from the summer. Something kind of bad happened at the end of the last academic term, and he's trying to get away from that, but also try to work on his PhD thesis. which he's struggling at because of the aforementioned issues. I bought this book because I really liked the cover first of all, and then when I read the summary I was even more intrigued. I just love the clash, I suppose, of somebody from such a different background going to work on a farm for the summer, but I was a little bit concerned at the start that his relationship with Alice might be a bit sinister or something, or that other people might view it. I thought that might be a very big part of the book, and I was a bit worried, but I don't think you need to be that concerned about that. I will say I really enjoyed this book. One of my favourite books of the year up until like the 80% mark, but I really didn't like the ending, just for many reasons. I don't want to spoil anything, because like I said, the rest of the book is fabulous. If you do want to read it, I did buy and gaze the word. You would never know from the back of this book that it does have LGBTQ plus themes, but a lot of the book as well does focus around Spencer's relationship with a man, and that was really well written as well. Just the end kind of broke me a little bit. So yeah, just an excellent book. Just maybe not an excellent ending. The next book I'm going to talk about was Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. I just remembered this book randomly one day. It was one of my favourite books when I was younger. I absolutely loved it. Even though I wouldn't say I read it that many times, it probably loomed large in my head. I didn't have my own copy or anything. I think I got it out from the mobile library once or twice, and really stuck in my head. Like, I suppose even back then I really liked like historical fiction. So it focuses about this young boy called Tom who's sent away from his house in the country, I think, to move to, and he's got sent to live in this townhouse because his brother has measles. So he's very bored, he doesn't have much to do, but he figures out there's something weird about the clock in the house. It rings at 13th hour, and at that time he can go downstairs. He can actually access a garden from the late Victorian period, and he makes friends with this girl called Hattie. I think I was always a little bit fascinated by Hattie, just as Tom kind of is a little bit when I was younger, and that was my favourite part. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it stands up to me as well as an older reader as other of my favourite books like Anne of Green Gables or Goodnight Mr. Tom do. Those books will just, I don't know, I can read them again and again and again, and I still think they're absolutely wonderful. Whereas maybe I still enjoyed it. It just didn't have quite the same everlasting charm as the others. The next book I'm going to talk about, I have a lot of books about animals there, so it feels like it this month, but this is another book I bought in London, and it was Brood by Jackie Polzin. I absolutely couldn't resist it when I saw this cover with the 4 hens on it. We have 7 rescue hens ourselves, and I just love our hens. Not the most intelligent animals ever, but they do have their own little personalities, and they're so cheeky. Oh my god. And you will never whenever I'm like on holidays or at somebody else's house and there's like scraps left over, potato skins or bits of fat or whatever, I'm like, what do I do with these? Or like if you're out in a cafe and somebody has toast left over from their breakfast, like, give me that, I'll bring it home for the hens. They'll absolutely try to bite the fingers off you. But yes, I just saw that somebody had written a book about hens and I had to have it. So the names of the 4 hens are delightful, and they're Gloria, Gam Gam, Darkness and Miss Hennepin County, and their unlikely owner who narrates the tale. I'm trying to think now if she actually ever has a name. I don't think she does. It's one of those books where the narrator isn't named, but herself and her husband are looking after these 4 hens. I will say that there's an awful lot about hens in this book, so maybe if you weren't as interested in hens as I am, you wouldn't find it as interesting. It just goes into it in such a heartwarming way, and I don't know how she could make just the everyday details of looking after these hens so interesting and so lovely. But obviously very hard moments as well. Hens don't have very long lifetimes, at least the factory ones that we've got. After we got them, I think the longest one lived for like 2 years or something, and they're very well looked after, so that's just the reality of life with them. And that's very much a part of this book. I suppose it's one of those books where that is like the most obvious storyline, but there's a lot of layers underneath it, mostly to do the woman really wants to have children but she hasn't been able to have children, and I suppose the hens kind of represent something in her life for that. So yeah, I just thought it was a really heartwarming book and absolutely brilliant. It'll be one of my favourites this year again, I think. Another book that I bought recently and also deals with animals is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. I'd heard about this book on BookTube and other places as many times, and I was always kind of interested in it, mostly probably because it was set in the Scottish Highlands and it was about wolves, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. Another of my favourite books of the year. I think I'm going to have to cut this list down, but we are getting close to the end of the year, I suppose. But Inti Flynn has had a bit of a traumatic past, and she arrives to Scotland with her sister as part of this project to try and reintroduce wolves into Scotland. So it's something she's really, really passionate about, but there's obviously a lot of local opposition, as there would be like for any project of this type. I know they were reintroducing eagles to somewhere in Ireland there a few years ago in Donegal, and yeah, there's obviously a lot of opposition from farmers that were worried about their lambs and things, and it's very much the same here. She has that conflict, but there's also a domestic drama, I suppose, happening that she becomes a little bit involved in as well, and she also gets to know the local policeman and develops a relationship with him, and that gets a bit complicated also, and there's actually a murder mystery wrapped up in it all. So I really enjoyed all aspects of this book, I have to say. It was just, I just absolutely loved the things it had to say about conservation and about rewilding, and it gave me so much to think about. I don't really seek out to learn about rewilding and stuff as much as I should, and I think through fiction is such an easy way to get some idea of what people are trying to do. But also it was really interesting here, there was a character in Inti's life that maybe took that to an extreme, and that also wasn't great and caused problems. So it was so thought-provoking. Really love the characters, and just so many twists all along, and yeah, one for animal lovers definitely. And like the atmosphere of the Scottish Highlands is captured like so well, you really felt like you were there. I read this in a weekend. I was actually going to an event in a different county, and I arrived early to the town, and I sat in my car for 45 minutes instead of being outside on a nice day. I wanted to finish this book. It was you just really, somebody told me when I picked up this, actually, you just need to block out a chunk of time to read it, and that is so true. Definitely don't plan anything to do while you're reading this. It was a brilliant thriller, but just so many other aspects to it as well. So the last two books I'm going to talk about then, I actually don't have physical copies of. The first one is Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry, which I've heard a lot of people talking about because it was nominated for the Man Booker Prize, which is great. I don't have it because it's actually going to be our book club book for next month, although I had read it before, and I actually haven't been to the last two book clubs, so I'd better go to the next one. And yes, so I have only read one Sebastian Barry before, and that was A Long Long Way, which is a book about Irish soldiers in the First World War. This book is set more in the modern period. It's about this retired Gardner or policeman that's living in this kind of cottage that's attached to a castle in a coastal area. It's very introspective. These two current guards come to call on him because they want to ask him about a case that happened in his past, and it dredges up a lot of memories. Yeah, I did enjoy it, if enjoy is the word. It deals with some very hard topics. The only thing is, I'm not even sure whether to say this here. Like, obviously the things that happened in Ireland regarding the Catholic Church and were very important, but I think maybe we're just getting a lot of Irish contemporary literature that deals with this issue at the moment. So, and it is so important that all these stories are told, but I suppose maybe you just get a little bit fatigued with the same background of characters all the time. Well, not the exact same, but you know what I mean. Like, it's a very common theme that writers are exploring now. It was very important to Sebastian Barry, I'm sure that he did it. Yeah, I might just seek out different themes in books if I can, for the next while, just to give myself a chance to rest, I suppose. I haven't read any of the other books on the Booker long list, so I'm not sure how it lines up with all of them, but so there's no doubt about it that Sebastian Barry's writing is absolutely beautiful. I didn't love it as much as Long Long Way, but that was purely because of the subject matter, I'd say, and that did win the Man Booker Prize, I suppose, so that's like that's a high standard to compare it against. So yes, I'll definitely be looking forward to reading more Sebastian Barry in the future. Finally then is the last book I'm going to talk about, which is My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. I picked this up on audiobook. I wanted something relatively easy to listen to, and I'd been intrigued by this like many people, I suppose. I heard about it when the Harry Styles movie was released. I would be interested in watching the film just to see how they took it on, because of the way it was told. From the trailer, it seems to focus, not having seen the film, it seems to focus quite a lot on the men, whereas definitely I think the predominant character in the book is the woman in the relationship, whose name I can't remember, I'm so sorry. Viola, something like that. Yes, I think it's Viola. The policeman's name is Tom, and then he actually starts he is married to Viola, but he actually starts a relationship with this man called Sebastian, who's the curator of an art gallery. So Tom and Viola are kind of from quite an ordinary background, while Sebastian is from a more privileged background, I suppose. Viola is completely oblivious that there is anything going on for most of the book. There's a very unusual dynamic going on between the three of them. So you see inside Sebastian's head and Viola's head, but you never see inside Tom's head. So the three of them are very flawed characters. Even Viola, who, like, I suppose if you were to pick a victim here, she'd probably be it. But it really is about the time that it was set in. I think it was set during the 1950s or something. But yeah, it's just, I think it's told so tenderly, I think, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a brilliant book. Very sad, very tragic at times, and yeah, just I don't know, it was just like tragic of how people had to live, I suppose, when they had no other choice back then. So yeah, just really, really enjoyed it. So yes, with that, I think I had a really good month of reading. Like happens with a lot of months, I think I read most of these books in the first 3 weeks of the month, and then I didn't finish any book for 2 weeks after that, but that's just the way it is. A mention for the World Cup readathon, I am behind. It's over now, but I drew Costa Rica, so I basically, they bet no one. I don't think any team that bet Costa Rica that meant that I had to read a book from them. I think Japan did me a favour and won a game. No other country I was drew won a game. So yes, so I have to do 3 things. I have to finish my book for Costa Rica. I know it's a disgrace, I didn't even manage to finish that one. I am enjoying it, it's just I only have it on my iPad, so I need to read that. It's just not the most appealing form to read on my iPad, so I tend to reach for my Kindle or paper book instead. I have to read some more of Don Quixote, not just because it is one of my goals from the year to finish it, but also because Spain bet my team again, so I have to read another few chapters. And I also have to read a book from Sweden, and I was wondering what I'd read for this. And I even went into Daunt Books when I was in London looking for a book from Sweden, and there was nothing really that was taking my fancy. I don't think there was that many there unless I wasn't looking in the right place. And then I had the brainwave that The Girl in the Dragon Tattoo actually is a book from Sweden, so I might try and read that this month. I had an unusual experience with that trilogy in the haphazard way my mother used to buy me Christmas presents. She bought me years ago when it first came out the last book in the trilogy, and I read that and I never read the first 2, and I don't think I understood much of the third book, so I do own the 3 of them, so I have kind of wanted to reread that trilogy. So yeah, if I can, I'll try and fit it in this month. Now that I say it here, I'll have to do it right. Well, I suppose not with the goals, but sure, we'll see. But yes, that was my excellent reading month, I think. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday for my next video.